Let's take a trip to Versailles as we take a deep dive into the life and words of Louis XIV, also known as Louis the Great or the Sun King. We will take a look at his achievements, the way he chose to rule, and 3 quotes that showed his absolute power. We will see how some of these monarchs truly believed they were ordained by God, and when treated as such, we can see the true nature of a person who is given everything without earning it with his merit, by simply being born into the right family. It seems some have all the luck, call it an amazing past life karmic account, but this is an exposition on how a human being thinks of himself as a god among men, and what being treated this way can do to a person's psyche. This is in no way a judgment of the man, rather a study and critique of the times that allowed what could be the worst of us in some cases to rule with impunity. This is a common trope throughout human history. This is simply one man's opinion about how we can learn from others' example, good or bad, rich or poor. It all has something to teach. Was Louis good for his people, or just holding the place for the man in the iron mask? I believe people are not meant to be given such power. A meritocracy not only creates strength of character, but it creates humble humans who have known the pains of struggle. They will know that desperate place, and if they place that pain on others, they will see themselves. Whatever the faults of these monarchs, their crafts were not honed. They were created to be such, with no choice in the matter, so we cannot fault them. But we can learn from them. This is the key, so let's dive in. Louis XIV, also known as Louis the Great or the Sun King, was the King of France from 1643 until his death in 1715. He is one of the most famous and powerful monarchs in European history, known for his absolute rule and his long reign of 72 years, the longest of any major European monarch. Louis centralized power in the monarchy, weakening the influence of the nobility and establishing a strong, centralized state. He's also known for his extravagant lifestyle and the construction of the Palace of Versailles, which became a symbol of royal power and prestige. Under his rule, France became the dominant power in Europe, though his constant wars and lavish spending eventually strained the French economy. What were some of his notable achievements? Was it all ball gowns and pompadour-powdered wigs? Or was he a man of the people? Did he advance France forward, and not just think about his own well-being? Louis XIV's greatest achievements include both political and cultural accomplishments that shaped France and Europe for generations, such as centralization of power. Louis XIV strengthened the French monarchy by consolidating power and reducing the influence of the nobility. He ruled as an absolute monarch. We can also see military expansion. He expanded and modernized the French army, making it one of the most powerful in Europe. His reign included several major wars, like the War of Spanish Succession, that extended French influence. Though they were costly, he made economic reforms. With the help of his finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Louis reformed taxation, supported industry and trade, and aimed to make France economically self-sufficient through mercantilist policies. Louis believed in cultural patronage. He made France the cultural center of Europe by supporting the arts, music, architecture, and literature. Under his reign, French classical culture flourished, and institutions like the Académie Française gained prominence. Lastly, he made famous the Palace of Versailles, with his transformation of a hunting lodge into the Grand Palace of Versailles, which showcased royal power and became a model for absolute monarchy. It also served as a tool to control the nobility by requiring them to live their part of the year. While his reign left France more centralized and culturally dominant, it also set the stage for financial strain and social unrest that would contribute to the French Revolution later in the 18th century. So, we can see that with some of these general achievements, Louis took some noteworthy steps to further France's standing in the world. But these seemingly great feats were just that. They seemed to be an extension of a man's ego. This is not a judgment of the man. I simply believe that any man on this earth, if given to the right circumstances, will allow his ego to dictate what he does, seemingly only looking out for his legacy. If enabled in such a manner, without the proper guidance and voices, giving heed to unpretentious notions, while outwardly it can be inferred that these are some great things for a monarch to do. But if you look closely, these actions he took did not better his people, they simply bettered the state, which was the monarchy. This is a tale as old as time. A king is traditionally so far removed from his people that he has no idea how the common man lives. How can one rule properly if they do not understand the people they were meant to govern? This is why the greatest leaders seem to have some sort of novel or humble beginning in which they traveled through the hallways of turmoil, hardship, or had their own share of problems early in life, thus molding the man into a person who could empathize with others. But when you were born into the palace, with people tending to your every need, do you blame them for thinking they are our betters? It is simple human psychology. We are how we are treated, especially early in life. And yes, our inherent personalities have a lot to do with this, because there are some exceptions to the rules, but for the most part, those who attain their kingship through strife and hardship tend to value it more, thus acting in the best interests of their subjects. Louis XIV is best known as an absolute monarch, not typically viewed as a man of the people. His leadership style focused on consolidating royal power rather than democratic ideals. However, some of his words do reflect a sense of duty, responsibility, and concern for France as a whole. Here are 3 quotes that could support the idea of Louis XIV as a ruler who believed he was serving the people, even if from above. The first quote we will be looking at is, "I am the state." This quote simply says what we already know, and it just reiterates the myriad of monarchs who came into the throne simply through genetic disposition, rather than merit. This is why truly wise rulers do not care how many sons they have. If they have 10 sons and all 10 are not worthy of the throne, or have the best interest of the people in mind, then that king has a responsibility to not release a menace onto the people. But we all know filial love can be the downfall of the crown. We can see a great example in ancient India. If you are familiar with the Mahabharata, you will know that King Bharata had 9 sons, and all of them he believed were unworthy of the throne. So he bequeathed his throne to one not of his lineage. This is why he is remembered through history, and his country became his namesake. He did something so radical, broke with tradition, did not care, because he knew his people would suffer. If all rulers had this altruistic viewpoint, then the world may have turned with a little less chaos. Number 2. Every time I appoint someone to a vacant position, I make 100 unhappy and 1 ungrateful. This quote is actually quite insightful, and yet comical at the same time, because he tried to understand his fellow man by deeming them ungrateful for his beneficent gifts. I cannot completely disagree with this notion, because we all know humans to be ungrateful, but I believe this is true in modern times more than any other time in history. We can see that we live in a time where there is still strife and hunger, but it is nowhere near as close to where it was throughout history. In today's world, the basic needs of food, shelter, and security are met more than they ever have been, so people can pursue other things, or be completely bored once these needs are met. Either way, people find more to complain about in modern times, like a starving man with a Christmas ham under his arms, complaining he has no bread. This quote reflects his awareness of the complex and often thankless task of governing and managing people's expectations, suggesting some humility, or at least realism in leadership. Our final quote is, "It is legal because I wish it." This quote is fantastically apropos, but represents a very serious notion held by monarchs throughout history. When a man has all the power in his hands, and has men who are superior to him in every way, physically and mentally, doing his bidding for him, fearing him, then that affects the man's psyche like no other. He then truly begins to believe he is untouchable, and the sun rises and sets because he says so. Can you blame him? I have often said that it is not these charismatic, eccentric leaders who are totally to blame. It is the people who enable this type of behavior, the cogs in the wheel who do his bidding, the ones who bow and scrape to advance their own agendas, and all the while the people suffer. I realize it is very difficult to go against years of tradition on revering the monarch's power, but this is why we see such revolution throughout history, because good men were tired of laying down, watching the droning of their fellow man, all to further the line of a spoiled, mentally unstable dictator. We can look at this as a learning experience, because ironically at some point, the people put this line on the throne, and once dug in, it is nearly impossible to root out centuries of royal tradition and the fear it encompassed. Yet men who were tired of having their lives run into the ground by spoiled children took matters into their own hands. And this is why in modern times, monarchs are merely figureheads who wield no real power anymore. The world has changed, and now the people realize that it is not in the best interest of the country to give all the power to one family and let them inherit the wealth of the country, when that money could be better spent. This is why the monarch is nearly extinct today, because after millennia of this, the people have had enough, and have at least tried to evolve past this, to maybe learn from history in this case. So, we can revere tradition, history, and tout the pomp and vaunted positions that came with royalty. I love this, but when it comes to one man, unfit for the job, ruling men, who in many cases have more skills all around, is simply illogical, though authoritarian in tone. This quote can be interpreted as Louis taking personal responsibility for governance, showing he did not hide behind advisors or institutions, believing that he alone was accountable for the state's direction, which he saw as benefiting the people through strong, centralized rule. This analysis is in no way a judgment of monarchs, or people's right to tradition in general. It is merely a deep dive into novel notions, to help us better learn from the mistakes of the past. If you ask me, giving a man total power over a country, and its people without any vaunted credentials or experience, other than genetic markers and family ties, is simply closing your eyes and hoping for the best. So, what can we learn from Louis's life and words? Louis XIV's reign offers valuable lessons about leadership, power, and legacy. He showed the importance of vision and image, using grandeur and ceremony, especially through the construction of Versailles, to project strength and unity. His centralization of power brought stability to France, but it also revealed the dangers of unchecked authority, as it led to economic strain and growing resentment. Louis's strong support for the arts made France a cultural leader in Europe, reminding us that great leaders shape their nations, not just through politics, but through culture. He was also known for his discipline and sense of duty, often working long hours and taking personal responsibility for the state. Ultimately, his reign teaches us the value of vision, commitment, and cultural investment, while warning against the long-term risks of absolute rule. We can see that Louis was like most monarchs of the time, a mere figurehead, a representation and continuation of a line that came from warriors and conquerors once upon a time, but have now evolved into ego-driven, spoiled children who do not only lack the need to dress themselves, but have no need to. Would you be happy bowing to this? That is why we dive into these characters, to show us how ridiculous humanity can be throughout history, but it is a necessary part of our evolution, that we constantly fail and make mistakes, so that one day we can evolve into a race of people our ancestors can be proud of. So when going through your own life, as I go through mine, we see what happens when you enable people. Even if Louis was not even in the realms of other notorious monarchs, he can still serve as a benchmark of our history. And what is history good for? To learn from others' mistakes, as to not repeat them ourselves. When we do not speak up, it leads to a powder keg that will one day explode. So in our own lives, when we are electing our own leaders, we should look to history, look to Louis. Well, there were 17 of them, so he may have been the real man in the Iron Mask, replaced by his twin brother. Just ask the Musketeers, one for all and all for one.